I'm now joined by the CEO of Novartis, Vas Narasimhan. Thank you so much for joining Bloomberg Television.
No, thank you. Great to be here.
I want to start out with your 2020. Part of your growth has been coming from these cost cuts. How do you maintain that and achieve that growth beyond 2020?
Look, we really are excited by our overall performance coming out of 19 and 20. Strong sales growth. We're also guiding to continued core operating income growth and margin expansion. It does come from a continuation of our productivity programs. We expect to deliver $2 billion in productivity through the end of 2020. And we expect that to continue now to the medium term. Today, we're announcing a continued productivity program to lead to another $1.5 billion of savings. That's really driven by great manufacturing performance and great productivity in our both manufacturing and business services, but heavy investment in data science and digital technologies as well, which is really transforming the company. The other driver, though, the really big driver of our operating income growth is that sales growth, those new innovations. We have 15 launches. We had 5 major drug approvals in 2019. That's what's really going to fuel that continued operating income growth in the long term.
I'm going to get back into earnings in a moment, but gripping the world right now in the financial markets is this coronavirus. You led, when Novartis had vaccine unit, you led the response to H1N1 virus. What technology do you think needs to be used, and how quickly could we see something hit the market that could combat this virus?
You know, first thing I always like to think about in these situations is we need to understand the underlying biology of this virus. How transmissible is it? What is the case fatality rate? What's the underlying science around this? And there's still a lot we need to understand. In the near term, the biggest opportunity will be testing existing antiviral drugs, and many firms that have antiviral medicines are currently providing them to the Chinese government to currently test whether or not these drugs would work to contain such a virus. And then over the next 6 months to a year, I would expect vaccine candidates to be developed and then ultimately put into testing and then be broadly available.
So in a year, we could potentially see a vaccine for this?
I would say that's in the range of what you would expect. But I think it could take longer. It all depends on the underlying biology and the science.
Now, I know you said that there's no impact right now on your supply chain, which many people are worried about for the pharma industry. But what has been your conversations like the past week with your employees and your distribution centers, et cetera, in China? What preemptive measures are you taking?
You know, our number one concern is our associates in China, and there we are aligned with what the government has advised, keeping our offices closed, asking our associates not to travel and not to engage at the moment with all of their various stakeholders in order to protect themselves from this current situation. In terms of our supply chain, what we see right now is a very stable situation. We have safety stocks for all of our key medicines. Most of our key suppliers as well are far away from the center of this particular outbreak. So we feel very good with where we are in the supply chain. I think the key is we'll have to just closely monitor the situation. Right. It's obviously very fast evolving.
Now, I want you to put your white coat on. You're a medical doctor by training. The World Health Organization decided not to declare this a health emergency. Right. Do you think that that's going to have to change?
Again, it's very hard to predict. When you look at the cases right now, they're predominantly in China. You don't see sustained spread outside of China from person to person in other geographies. So I think that's what the WHO is really looking at. Is this contained to a single geography within China, or is this really a situation where we see sustained person-to-person spread outside of China? And I think the data is what's going to drive the decision.
And there's finally on this, the vaccines for these diseases are so hard because they pop up. The pharma industry make this lucrative.
This is a long story, you know, it goes back decades. I mean, if you think even back 1997, we had H5N1, then we had SARS, then we had H7N9, H1N1, MERS. These viruses keep popping up. The challenge is, you know, when they pop up, we have a big response. You see firms crowding in to try to develop new technologies. But then when the viruses start to go down and the cases start to go down, everybody loses interest. And so the real challenge for public policy is how do you maintain capacity and innovation power in between the outbreaks? And we still haven't solved that as a society.
February marks 2 years for you at the helm. You tweeted last week you've done $70 billion in transactions. What's next? What are you looking at in terms of M&A opportunities? What's high on your list? Any new technologies or therapies you're going after?
Our M&A strategy centers around trying to continue to build on our core of innovative medicine. So we're always looking for new technologies, continuing to build in areas like cell and gene therapy, radioligand therapy. As we've demonstrated, I think we're one of the leaders in the industry of moving beyond older technologies to try to be on the cutting edge of the latest science. Now, beyond that, we can also look to build on our core therapeutic areas. So we had last year a deal for a drug called Xiidra for ophthalmology, and then a deal for a medicines company for inclisiran and cardiovascular disease. We'll stick with that strategy, and I can't promise what will come in 2020, but our goal very much is to stick with a strategy of programmatic bolt-on M&A to keep building the company, and we're very pleased with where we are.
I want to ask you about your gene therapy, Zolgensma. There's a partial hold on it with the FDA, but Roche also has a drug that could potentially be similar to fight this. What if their drug comes in and is effective? What's the impact going to be on your business?
The first thing to note is Zolgensma, under 2 years of age, is now approved in the U.S., doing extremely well.
Right, it's just for adults that we have this hold.
Correct. And it had a great Q4 and continues great momentum this year. We expect in the European Union to get a positive opinion in Q1, and then continue a geographic rollout for these babies. And that's the real power of Zolgensma. When you look at infants, we want newborn screening, and we want them to get Zolgensma, and then hopefully one day eliminate this disease from the planet, which would be our aspiration. Now, in the older kids, our strategy is to have a one-time therapy. And we believe we have a highly efficacious one-time therapy. We expect to get off clinical hold, we hope, in the coming months, file the medicine this year. And then, of course, a parent has a choice. Do you want lifelong oral therapy, or do you want a surgical procedure 4 times a year, which is another option, or do you just want a one-time therapy? And that one-time therapy has really remarkable efficacy, and that's the value proposition we think Zolgensma brings.
And just finally, I want to ask you, you're from the States. The U.S. election is going to be one of the biggest stories of 2020. Drug pricing is probably one of the most important topics, especially for citizens voting. What are you bracing for?
Really, I'm bracing for an unpredictable situation, which I've gotten used to, I think, in this role and with the U.S. policy environment. Very difficult to predict. As you know, multiple moving parts, multiple different legislation, the potential for executive action as well. I think the key for us as a company is just to be prepared for those alternatives. And if you look at Novartis' profile, we have very low exposure to these various programs in the United States. We believe whatever comes, we'll be able to adapt our business model. And I still believe in the long run, the winners are the companies that can really innovate breakthrough medicines. So whether there's a Part D reform or a Part B reform or nothing at all, our focus has to be on just finding the next breakthroughs and getting them out to patients as fast as we can.